Trump versus the World by Patrick Boyle. This is a 34-minute masterclass in geopolitical analysis delivered with Patrick Boyle's signature bone-dry wit. The video covers the U.S. military raid on Venezuela to capture Nicolas Maduro, the economic reality of Venezuelan oil, the political aftermath, and the alarming emergence of what Boyle calls the Donroe Doctrine. If you want to understand the single most consequential foreign policy event of early 2026, this is essential viewing. Section 1. Operation Absolute Resolve and the Pizza Trail. The video opens with a detail so absurd it could only be real. Open-source intelligence trackers detected a sudden spike in late-night pizza orders near the Pentagon on the evening of January 2, 2026. This informal indicator, historically correlated with major events, preceded what Boyle describes as a textbook display of modern military prowess. President Trump issued the command from Mar-a-Lago, "Good luck and Godspeed." Within hours, over 150 aircraft launched from 20 locations. U.S. Space Force and Cyber Command effectively turned off the lights of Caracas and disabled air defenses. Delta Force operators deployed via low-flying Night Stalker helicopters. Maduro was reportedly caught trying to reach a steel safe room, photographed blindfolded and bound aboard the USS Iwo Jima, and delivered to a New York jail. Boyle notes the irony with characteristic dryness. There is a certain irony in the administration's sudden enthusiasm for importing Venezuelans, especially ones it claims were involved in drug gangs. Maduro is now at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, joining what Boyle calls a legendary roster, including the ghost of Jeffrey Epstein and the rapper Sean Diddy Combs. Section 2. The Oil Mirage and Why Exxon Says No. The central justification for the raid rests on Venezuela's staggering 303 billion barrels of proven oil reserves, between 17 and 20% of the global total. But Boyle dismantles this number systematically. High-profile energy investors like John Arnold point out this figure was reported by Hugo Chavez to OPEC to bolster the regime's standing, and has been uncritically repeated ever since. Estimates suggest reserves may be exaggerated by as much as 220 billion barrels. Even if accurate, Venezuelan oil is heavy and sour with the consistency of molasses and high sulfur content, similar to Canadian oil trading at around $43 per barrel. It requires blending with diluents like naphtha imported from Russia. Stainless steel pipes are needed due to CO2 content. New projects would require at least $80 per barrel to break even, but global crude hovers around $60. The industry that Trump intends to reboot has been hollowed out. Refineries run at 20% capacity, pipelines are over 50 years old, and most skilled engineers fled years ago. ExxonMobil CEO Darren Woods struck a skeptical tone at a White House meeting, describing Venezuela as uninvestable without significant changes to the legal system. Exxon had its assets seized twice before. A third entry would require protections that simply do not exist. Chevron, the last U.S. major on the ground, recently completed a $53 billion acquisition of Hess, giving it a 30% stake in Guyana, where break-even is half of Venezuela and political risk is negligible. Section 3. The Rodriguez Gamble and the Nobel Prize Soap Opera. Rather than installing the Democratic opposition leader Maria Corina Machado, who won a landslide and whose hand-picked candidate secured two-thirds of the vote in 2024, the Trump administration signaled intent to work with the Rodriguez siblings. Delcy and Jorge Rodriguez rose as loyalists to Chavez and Maduro. Jorge is the National Assembly president. Delcy, now acting president, served as both vice president and oil minister, and is deeply implicated in systematic repression and election fraud. Boyle reveals why Machado was sidelined, and the reason is genuinely bizarre. Sources close to the White House indicate Trump viewed Machado's acceptance of the Nobel Peace Prize as an ultimate sin. One insider noted that if she had turned it down and stated it belonged to Trump, she would be president of Venezuela today. In a surreal turn, Trump told Sean Hannity he would accept the prize if Machado offered it during their meeting, prompting the Norwegian Nobel Committee to immediately clarify that the award cannot be revoked, shared, or transferred. Former UN Ambassador Louise Blas concluded this was not regime change, but a negotiated extraction. Maduro was sacrificed by his own governing apparatus to preserve the power structure in exchange for a deal with Washington. Section 4. The Donroe Doctrine and Global Ripple Effects. What started as a tongue-in-cheek New York Post headline has become official policy. Trump embraced the label Donroe Doctrine at his press conference, claiming his administration has superseded the 1823 Monroe Doctrine by a real lot. This new framework claims the right to own and manage the hemisphere's resources. Cuba, dependent on Venezuelan oil, faces immediate crisis. Secretary of State Rubio views Maduro's fall as a catalyst for Cuba's collapse. Iran and Russia condemned the raid as state terrorism. China immediately condemned it as a blatant use of force against a sovereign state. Brookings Institution analysts worry this creates a dangerous template. If the international community accepts a might equals right philosophy in the Western Hemisphere, Beijing may see a green light for Taiwan. White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller explicitly defended this, arguing the world is governed by the iron laws of strength rather than international law illusions. His wife Katie Miller posted a map of Greenland colored in stars and stripes with the caption, "Soon." Trump proposed a historic $1.5 trillion military budget for 2027, a nearly 50% increase. And the Donroe Doctrine reached its most transactional expression when Trump announced seizure of $3 billion in oil to be sold at his personal discretion, with the caveat that Venezuela may only purchase American-made products with proceeds. Section 5. Legal Realities and the Greenland Escalation. Despite the controversy, Maduro faces a daunting legal path. Under the Care-Frisbee Doctrine, a 19th-century ruling that essentially says we do not care how you got here, we are just glad you could make it, U.S. courts have repeatedly held that forcible abduction does not impair jurisdiction. The prosecution's case reveals gaps between political branding and legal reality. The indictment largely abandons the claim that the Cartel of the Suns exists as an organization, portraying it as an abstraction. The DEA's National Drug Threat Assessment has never officially mentioned it, yet legal experts say the bar for narcotics conspiracy is quite low. Jurors will easily grasp that Venezuela is a way station for Colombian drugs and that senior officials knowingly enabled transit. There could be a diplomatic off-ramp where Maduro negotiates his own release by offering enough value. Meanwhile, Trump dismissed Denmark's 500-year territorial claim on Greenland, warning the U.S. would acquire the island the easy way or the hard way. The administration floated direct cash payments of up to $100,000 to individual Greenlanders to encourage secession. The Danish Prime Minister warned any military move would spell the end of NATO. Key takeaways. First, Operation Absolute Resolve was a spectacular tactical success, but created a strategic quagmire with no democratic transition plan. Second, Venezuelan oil is largely an economic mirage, with break-even costs above current market prices and catastrophically decayed infrastructure. Third, the decision to work with regime insiders rather than democratic opposition was driven partly by Trump's personal grudge over the Nobel Prize. Fourth, the Donroe Doctrine represents a fundamental shift from defensive Monroe principles to aggressive resource extraction. Fifth, the international implications are severe, with China potentially seeing precedent for Taiwan. Sixth, Maduro will likely be convicted despite political motivations because U.S. courts do not care how defendants arrive. Seventh, the Greenland escalation signals that even NATO allies are not immune to this transactional logic.